If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button, because after what I'm about to tell you, you'll want to see how deep this story really goes. The night was colder than usual for Melbourne's north, April 13th, 1991. A quiet suburb, Templestowe, where streetlights hummed and families slept behind locked doors. But inside a modest brick house on Serpels Road, the Chan family's peace was about to shatter forever. At 9:05 p.m., Karmein Chan was home with her mother and two younger sisters when the nightmare began. The girls were watching television, their laughter muffled behind the walls. Their mother, Phyllis, was running a warm bath upstairs. Then, an unfamiliar sound. A door creaked. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. By the time Phyllis rushed downstairs, she saw something she could never forget. A man in a black balaclava and dark clothing forcing Karmein, just 13 years old, to the side door. His gloved hand covered her mouth. A knife gleamed under the hallway light. He said just one thing before vanishing into the dark. "Don't scream." Phyllis screamed anyway. Neighbors heard. Police were there within minutes. But the man and Karmein were gone. The initial search was massive. Helicopters scanned the bushland. Police dogs traced a faint scent to a dirt track that ended near a drainage tunnel. But it was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. The Chan family was devastated. Karmein was top of her class, a bright girl who dreamed of becoming a lawyer. The kidnapping made national headlines. But what came next made Australia realize something far worse was happening. Detectives soon noticed similarities to other cases. Other girls abducted in Melbourne's eastern suburbs, all taken from their homes at night. Each house found with spray-painted words on the walls. "Payback Asian drug dealer." The message was strange, almost theatrical, but there was no connection between any of the families and drug trafficking. It was a smokescreen, something meant to confuse investigators. The press started calling him Mr. Cruel. He was a ghost who invaded homes, tied up parents, and vanished with their daughters, only to release them days later, unharmed but deeply traumatized. Until Karmein. She never came home. Detective Inspector John McGuinness took charge of the task force. Operation Spectrum. Over 40 detectives, hundreds of leads, and a national manhunt. McGuinness believed Karmein's abduction wasn't random. He thought Mr. Cruel had studied the family for weeks, knew their schedules, the locks, even the sound of their dog's bark. But the investigation soon ran into silence. No ransom note. No call. No sightings. Then came a tip. A neighbor, a man named Graham, reported seeing a white Nissan van parked outside the Chan's home several times that month. It had no plates. Graham assumed it belonged to a tradesman, until that night. He saw the van again, engine running, lights off. Police traced every van in the region. Nothing. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at the local news station. Inside, a cassette tape. A distorted voice whispered through static. "You'll never find her. You're looking in the wrong place." But experts later confirmed it was a hoax. The months dragged on. The Chan family appeared on national television, pleading for Karmein's return. Phyllis broke down during the interview. Her words still echo decades later. "Please, if you have my daughter, don't hurt her. Just let her come home." Then, in April 1992, exactly 1 year later, a dog walker discovered something near an old landfill site in Thomastown. Behind a collapsed fence, half buried in dry earth, lay a shallow grave. Inside it, what remained of a young girl wrapped in a black plastic sheet. Dental records confirmed the impossible. It was Karmein Chan. The crime scene was eerily clean. No fibers, no fingerprints, no blood, just one clue, a single length of green electrical tape, matching the kind Mr. Cruel was known to use. It was the break investigators had feared, not hoped for. This time, Mr. Cruel hadn't let his victim go. Operation Spectrum shifted from a rescue to a homicide investigation. Police raided over 30 homes across Melbourne. Teachers, delivery drivers, electricians, even retired policemen were questioned. But every lead turned cold. And then something strange happened. The case files started disappearing. Certain documents were marked restricted and sealed under government order. McGinnis was told to stand down from several directions of inquiry, especially one that led to a high-ranking defense contractor who lived not far from the Chan family. It made no sense. Why shut down leads when a child's killer was still free? Years later, former officers would whisper about the files, how certain suspects had powerful connections, how evidence mysteriously went missing. But the most chilling part came from a note found in the case logbook years after the task force was disbanded. A single line scribbled by an unknown officer. "We got too close. Orders came from above." And yet, one secret still lingers in the shadows. During a 1996 audit, an officer found an unmarked tape in the evidence room. No label, no number, just a faint hum of white noise when played. But underneath, barely audible, was a voice. A man whispering. Karmein wasn't the first. She wasn't the last. No one ever found where that tape came from, or who put it there. When the press asked the department about it, they denied it ever existed, but retired detectives say otherwise. And in 2018, an internal report confirmed what the public never knew. Operation Spectrum's archive was incomplete. Dozens of evidence pieces, interviews, and statements were untraceable. That's where the trail officially ends. But behind closed doors, those who worked the case still believe they know what happened. They say Mr. Cruel wasn't one man, but a network, a ring of men who use coded phrases, secret meetings, and police insiders to cover their tracks. The official line says he vanished, but unofficially, someone inside the system made sure he stayed that way. Because when they reopened the old files years later, a new name surfaced. A name with links to the very task force that was meant to stop. As the deeper we go, the darker it gets. When Operation Spectrum was first launched, it was Australia's most extensive manhunt since the search for the Beaumont children. But by the time the task force disbanded in 1994, it had become something else entirely, an investigation that seemed cursed from within. Detective Inspector John McGinnis, once the face of the case, had begun receiving threats, not from Mr. Cruel, but from people inside his own department. Files he'd worked on for months vanished from his desk. Witness statements were rewritten. A surveillance photo that supposedly showed a man in a blue van outside the Chan home disappeared the morning before it was scheduled for forensic review. When McGinnis demanded answers, he was told, "It's being handled at a higher level." But no one could say which level. By late 1992, the task force had shrunk from 40 detectives to less than 10. Most were reassigned without warning. But one junior officer, Detective Constable Erin Wallace, stayed. She was quiet, sharp, and determined. While others gave up, she spent her nights combing through evidence logs. One evening, in the cold glow of the archive room, she noticed something strange. A set of photographs from the Chan crime scene that weren't listed in the case index. They showed shoe prints, size 10 distinctive tread, consistent with a work boot. But the photos had no timestamp, no forensic tag, nothing. She checked the chain of custody sheets. They'd been signed in by someone named T. Hargreaves. Problem was, no one named Hargreaves had ever been assigned to Operation Spectrum. Erin brought the discovery to McGinnis. Together, they traced a name. It led to a civilian contractor working for the Department of Defense, a surveillance technician who'd previously assisted police in bugging suspect homes. When they tried to contact him, they were told he died in a car accident 6 months earlier. But the accident report didn't exist in any public record. McGinnis realized they weren't dealing with a single predator anymore. This was something orchestrated, someone with power, access, and protection. In early 1993, a breakthrough, or what looked like one, arrived in the form of a confidential informant. He called himself Echo. He claimed to have information linking Mr. Cruel to a private school employee in Melbourne's northeast. The man, a respected educator, had once been investigated for inappropriate behavior with students, but the case was dismissed. Echo said this man had friends in law enforcement who helped cover things up. He also claimed the Chan kidnapping had been punishment for something her father discovered, something involving government property and private defense contracts. McGinnis pushed for surveillance warrants. His request was denied. A week later, Echo was found dead in a public restroom in Carlton. No signs of struggle. Cause of death, ruled as overdose. Except Echo didn't use drugs. At this point, McGinnis was ordered off the case entirely. His badge was suspended pending internal review. He tried to speak to the press, but the department issued a gag order. The story faded, but Erin couldn't let it go. She knew someone inside had buried the truth, and she was determined to find it. One night, she snuck into the evidence room, using a key borrowed from a sympathetic clerk. Inside, she found a sealed crate marked "Do Not Open, Authorized Access Only." The seal bore the initials DFR, Department of Federal Resources. Inside the crate were VHS tapes, marked with numbers instead of names. One was dated April 1991. When she played it, the footage was grainy. Surveillance video from a camera overlooking a suburban street. The timestamp matched the night Karmein vanished. At 9:04 p.m., headlights appeared. A white van stopped in front of the Chan residence. A figure got out, masked, tall, moving with purpose. Then another man stepped into frame, not masked, dressed in plain clothes. He spoke briefly with the masked man, nodded, and pointed toward the house. The camera cut out seconds later. Erin froze. She rewound the footage, zoomed in on the second man's face, and recognized him instantly. He was one of their own, Detective Sergeant Colin Reeves. Reeves had worked on Operation Spectrum during its early phase, assigned to surveillance coordination. He left the task force shortly after Carmine's abduction, transferring to an intelligence unit. The discovery shattered Erin. It explained everything: the missing files, the restricted evidence, the mysterious orders from above. Reeves wasn't investigating Mr. Cruel. He was helping him. But she had no proof beyond the tape, and no way to expose it without risking her career or her life. That same week, McGinnis called her in a panic. Someone had broken into his house. Nothing stolen, just a computer's hard drive wiped clean, and a note left behind on his desk. It read, "You're chasing ghosts. Stop." 2 days later, McGinnis disappeared. His car was found abandoned near the Yarra River. Police ruled it a personal matter. Erin knew better. She tried to retrieve the VHS tape, but by the time she returned to the evidence room, the crate was gone. Every log entry mentioning it had been deleted from the digital archive. She realized someone was watching her too. Anonymous calls. Unmarked cars parked outside her home. She took a leave of absence and went silent. In 1997, she mailed a sealed envelope to a journalist at the Age newspaper. Inside were copies of her notes, photocopies of the evidence tags, and a handwritten message. "If anything happens to me, look for the name Reeves." It didn't end with Carmine, but the envelope never made it to the newsroom. It was intercepted. The journalist later said a federal agent came to collect it before he could open it. When he asked for a receipt, the man simply said, "It's classified." The years rolled on. The case grew colder, then colder still. But in 2013, 22 years after Carmine's murder, a retired technician came forward. He claimed he'd once worked on surveillance systems for Operation Spectrum's restricted branch. He said they'd been told to destroy certain tapes and logs, under direct order from a man named Reeves. When asked why, the technician's voice broke. He said, "Because what was on those tapes wasn't just Mr. Cruel. It was us." That statement was never entered into public record, but a copy of it was leaked years later, along with an unverified list of persons of interest that included the names of police officers, teachers, and 2 government contractors. And among those names, one stood out: a man who still lived near the same Melbourne suburb, a man who once drove a white Nissan van, a man who'd quietly changed his name in 1992, the same year Carmine was buried. The truth was about to come out, but not from the police. Someone else had started digging. A private investigator who'd lost a sister to the same predator years earlier, and in his possession, something the authorities thought they'd erase forever: a copy of the tape. What he discovered next would expose everything the Australian government didn't want the world to see. Before you watch what comes next, hit subscribe, because after this, you'll question everything you thought you knew about justice. In 2015, 2 decades after the world forgot the name Mr. Cruel, a private investigator named Michael Trent reopened the case no one dared to touch. Trent wasn't a cop. He was a former journalist who'd lost his younger sister, Samantha, to an abduction that bore the same hallmarks: a break-in, a masked man, and a silent disappearance. Her case was never solved. For years, Trent gathered scraps, old police memos, censored documents, interviews with retired officers who only talked after a few drinks. What tied it all together was a single rumor whispered by a former technician. The tape still exists. Trent found it by accident, hidden inside a rusted toolbox purchased at a deceased estate auction. The previous owner? A retired Department of Defense electrician. Inside the box were old circuit boards, tools, and a black VHS tape wrapped in brown paper. On the label, only 2 words: Chan footage. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he set up a dusty player in his garage, camera rolling to document everything. As the tape played, static filled the screen. Then footage. A timestamp. April 13th, 1991, 2104. The same suburban street. The same white van. But this version was longer. After the masked man entered the Chan home, the camera didn't cut off. It kept rolling. Minutes later, 2 other men appeared at the edge of the frame. One wore a police badge clipped to his belt. The other, Michael paused the video, zoomed in, was Detective Sergeant Colin Reeves. Reeves watched the house calmly, arms folded, as the masked man led Karmein out through the side gate. The van door slid shut. Reeves turned the camera, just for a second, then waved. The image burned into Trent's mind. It wasn't a road detective covering up a crime. It was an inside job. Trent knew going public was dangerous. He encrypted the footage, copied it to multiple drives, and sent one to an independent reporter overseas. Then he made the second biggest mistake of his life. He called the police. Within 24 hours, his home was raided. The official reason: possession of restricted materials. His equipment was confiscated, but the tape? Gone before the officers arrived. Someone had broken in earlier that morning. The only trace left behind was a note taped to his computer monitor. Some stories stay buried for a reason. Days later, Trent vanished. Neighbors said they saw an unmarked sedan parked outside his flat the night before he disappeared. The CCTV system in the building malfunctioned that same night. But 2 weeks later, the overseas journalist received an anonymous email. Attached was a video file. Trent's recording of the tape playing in his garage. The angle was grainy, but clear enough. She uploaded it to a secure cloud server. The file was titled The Secret Files Australia Buried. Within hours, it spread through encrypted forums. The footage sparked panic within Victoria's law enforcement community. Former detectives demanded a review. A parliamentary inquiry was quietly proposed, then canceled. But the public had already seen enough. The government released a statement calling the tape inauthentic and misleading, claiming it was digitally fabricated to harm reputations. Still, inconsistencies emerged. The timestamp formatting matched authentic early 90s surveillance recordings used by the police. And one frame, frozen by digital forensics, showed something unmistakable. On the masked man's sleeve, a faded emblem, the insignia of the Victoria Police Tactical Unit. That revelation blew the case wide open again. Whistleblowers came forward. Retired Officer Darren Keane confessed that, during Operation Spectrum, certain suspects were never to be touched. He said Reeves headed a covert group within the task force, the Circle, whose job was to suppress evidence connecting law enforcement to a broader exploitation network operating across Melbourne's private schools and defense contractors. Keane's final statement was haunting. "We were told to protect the badge, not the kids." A month later, Keane died in a supposed domestic accident. In 2018, journalists from The Guardian, Australia launched an independent investigation. They tracked down Reeves, now living under a new identity in rural Victoria. When confronted, he refused to speak. He only said one thing before slamming the door. "You don't know what you found." When asked who she was, he didn't answer. But Erin Wallace's name resurfaced soon after. She'd been living off the grid for years, reportedly in Western Australia. A friend claimed she left with copies of her original case notes. And something else. A second tape. In 2020, an anonymous package arrived at a small true crime podcast studio in Perth. Inside, a USB drive, an old police badge, and a note reading, "For the record she deserves." The file on the drive showed fragments from the second tape, blurry images, but one stood out. A warehouse interior, rows of filing cabinets, each labeled with initials and dates. One drawer, caught in the light, bore the name K. Chan. Someone opens it. Inside are photos, reports, and a passport belonging to a man never listed as a suspect. Thomas Reeves. Colin Reeves' brother. The implication was devastating. The Mr. Cruel mask had hidden more than a single man. It had shielded a family, one inside the system, one outside, both working in tandem. One preyed, the other protected. The next day, the USB's contents vanished from the internet. Every upload link dead. Every mirrored file deleted. The studio received a cease and desist letter marked from the Commonwealth Office of Security. But not before one final frame was saved. A freeze shot from the tape's ending. A hand setting a folder down on a table. The folder's label read, "Next, K. Wallace." Since then, no one has seen Erin Wallace. Her name appears on no payroll, no electoral roll, no digital footprint. Some believe she's in witness protection. Others think she's dead. The Chan family moved overseas, changed their surname, and never spoke publicly again. As for Reeves, he was found dead in his home in 2022. Official cause, heart failure. But his neighbors said the power had been out for days, and the locks were cut from the inside. No one claimed his body. The official record closes the case as unsolved. But the question that lingers isn't who killed Karmein Chan. It's why her case was never meant to be solved. Because somewhere in those sealed archives lies proof that Mr. Cruel wasn't a ghost at all. He was a mask worn by men who knew the system better than anyone else. Because they built it. And the cruelest part? Those who tried to reveal the truth didn't vanish into thin air. They were erased, one file, one tape, one life at a time. They say justice always finds a way. But in Australia's darkest case, justice never stood a chance. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because the next case we uncover might still be happening right now.